Benjamin Day. This is Medicare for All, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare. Now, we do not usually start our podcasts with data or statistics, but
because fuck them.
I know that's it's all fake anyway, right?
Yeah.
But last week, Gallup released this kind of shocking poll that clearly, I think, reflects like a new reality for the country outside of data and statistics. They found that 38% of Americans now say that they put off medical treatment because of costs sometime in the past year. So this is 2021. But this is just a huge leap over just 1 year ago when only, and I say the word only cautiously here, only 26% of Americans were putting off care. That's already pretty bad in and of itself. And Gallup has been conducting this poll for over 20 years, and this is the worst that it has ever been. Even more troubling, 26% of respondents say that they put off treatment for very serious conditions or somewhat serious conditions. And that is like another huge leap over a year ago when, again, only 18% of Americans were putting off care for very serious or somewhat serious issues. And it's a little weird. We're now like 3 years into this pandemic. It feels like employment rates have been getting a little bit better. So, I mean, what the fuck is going on here that our access to healthcare is now worse than during the height of the pandemic when the economy was shut down and there were no vaccines? It felt like that was bottoming out, but apparently we're bottoming out now. So we have obviously an amazing guest joining us today to talk about this. Jillian, do you want to introduce her?
Oh, do I ever? So our guest today is the lovely and brilliant Rebecca Wood. Rebecca lived all over Virginia, and then she relocated to Massachusetts. This is where Ben and I got to meet her. She worked with a lot of different organizations and offices on Capitol Hill, on healthcare activism. Her healthcare work includes, speaking at rallies, protests, press conferences, and conventions. And most notably, she told her and her daughter Charlie's story at the introduction of Senator Sanders' Medicare for All Act hearing in 2017. And so she testified in front of the House Ways and Means Committee hearing on pathways to universal coverage in 2019. So Rebecca is a real pro. And she also regularly volunteers for Remote Area Medical, which provides access to healthcare for underserved communities, and is active in the push for universal school meals. I know school education justice is something you're passionate about as well. We are so excited to have you here, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you. I feel like the band is back together again, even if
It's true. It's true. I'm like a Dunkin' Donuts iced tea away from being in Massachusetts there with you today. Very cool. So, Rebecca, so we wanted to have you on today for two reasons. One is that we love you and we wanted an excuse to have you on. And B, or two, is because unfortunately you are a credentialed expert on delaying healthcare and how that works and the impact that can have. So you basically have like a PhD in delayed care at this point. So I wondered if you could just like tell our guests a little bit more about, how delayed care really led to you becoming a kind of leader in the movement, which is actually the one good consequence of delaying healthcare.
Yeah. It's a very long story. I will try to make it as succinct as possible. But it actually all started 10 years ago when my daughter Charlie was born. If you can believe it's been 10 years.
I can't actually. Yeah.
And she was delivered at 26 weeks gestation because I had severe early onset preeclampsia and we were both dying at that point. And so she was delivered, she was in the NICU for 3 months, and we were insured through my ex-husband's employer. So I thought we had what was considered good insurance. And yeah, and So she came home from the NICU and we thought, wow, that's the end. And boy, were we foolish because it was only the beginning. And over the next several years, Charlie needed enormous amounts of care from specialists, from therapists. We had to order specialty formulas. We had orthotics. We had adaptive equipment, just all of these things. And insurance for them had outrageous copays, deductibles. They had automatic denials. Just any way they could get out of paying, they would. And we were comfortable when Charlie was born. We were planning on buying a house in Northern Virginia and living that lifestyle. But unfortunately, the costs ate through our savings. And we found ourselves living paycheck to paycheck, no longer thinking of buying a house, just trying to keep our head afloat. And then I was having to make choices between her healthcare and mine. At first, it didn't feel like a big deal because it was like an asthma inhaler I left at the pharmacy counter. I would just have to draw my previous inhaler out longer. And then one day she needed a speech therapy payment. And it was right at the time when her speech was emerging. It was this.
Which is a big deal, right?
Yeah, it was huge because she was 3.5 and was prior to that was only grunting and pointing and maybe using one syllable words. And all of a sudden it was like, boom, she started talking. And I didn't want to miss that window of opportunity by not paying her speech therapy payment. But at the same time, I needed a root canal and a crown. And so like a lot of people do, I decided I would put off the root canal and crown until the next pay period, and I paid her speech therapy payment. Well, it turned out being a poor decision on my part because over the next week, I ended up getting an infection and it spread through my entire mouth and jaw. And I had to go to the ER because of swelling under my chin here and kind of in my neck started cutting off my airway. I had to get IV. They actually have a dental term for it. I forgot what it was, but it's not common. And
gross death-causing thing. Is that what it's called?
No, it's like some kind of angina or something, I think. But
I think the technical term is bad insurance coverage.
That's the thing. When I went to the ER, the doctor, it was a hospital that had a program for rural medicine, and the doctor was explaining to the student how they see it often in their ER. And then discussing the normal routes of care. And they were looking and seeing how bad the swelling was and figuring out how much time I had left before the swelling cut off my airway and whether they wanted to like trach me down here or if they had enough time for IV antibiotics. And so I remember just sitting there and listening to this, and it wasn't really sinking in like this was happening to me. Or maybe at this point I was so used to bad things happening, it just felt like, of course.
You do adjust to the new normal, you know,
right.
no matter how shitty and abnormal it is.
The part that broke me was after I did get the IV antibiotics, because I was lucky enough to get them, I had an allergic reaction to it. And so they all come running into that. And that is when I started crying. That was when I had enough. And I was like, I remember that was the part that broke me. Oh gosh, I'm almost crying thinking about it. But so then after a couple of days of IV antibiotics, they sent me home and said, you need to go to a dentist. You're going to lose some teeth. So go to the dentist, expecting to lose some teeth. And I remember sitting in the car beforehand thinking, okay, I have to go in, have to get some teeth pulled. this is the anything. Back when Charlie was in the NICU and we weren't sure if she was going to survive, I sat there and I thought, I would give anything for her to survive. So ever since that point, anytime something bad happened, I'd say, this is the anything. And so I remember sitting in the car saying that, and I finally willed myself to go in, and it was awful. In 6.5 hours, they pulled all of my teeth and scraped away parts of my jaw. And I was awake the entire time. And I remember being relieved when they were finished and thinking, oh, thank God that's over. And afterwards, I got in the car and my ex-husband was driving me home, and I just sobbed the whole car ride home. And I'm so sorry. I've told the story.
No.
I've told this story so many times. It kind of is funny when I get emotional now over it. And so, yeah, it just completely changed how, things were for us. And so then in 2017, when the ACA came under attack, I thought about all the things we had sacrificed for Charlie's care. And the repeal of the ACA would have made it for nothing because she would have become uninsurable. Yeah. So we fought, and it was a game changer for me because I no longer believed that what had happened to me, what had happened to us was part of the anything. I realized it was profound policy failure. And so now, because of my time on Capitol Hill, all I can see is policy. When I struggled with lunch debt, I thought, why is this a thing? What is the policy? Where's the policy failure on this?
It is a little bit liberating, but also a little bit depressing. It's like, you stop blaming yourself a little bit as much for all these things, but it's also so hard to change the policy that it's like, it's infuriating and enraging.
Yeah.
But so many people don't get past that point of internalizing it and blaming themselves, especially I think moms, and like that kind of idea that like your suffering has to be part of a bargain with God to get your kid healthy. It's just like, it's so fucked up. It's so fucked up. And that's one of the reasons actually that I'm really excited that we're talking about that. I'm sorry, excited that we're talking about this topic. It's thrilling to watch you cry on Zoom.
Again, I apologize for that.
You really shouldn't apologize at all. Although I will say to the listeners, I did make Rebecca promise she wouldn't make me cry on this. So we're in tough territory here. But like, I'm one of the things that I'm obsessed with here is like the way that for-profit healthcare impacts our psychology, and corrupts all of our relationships with medical care, right? To the point where, so many people, especially, in places like where I live in South Texas, where there's a lot of poverty and very little access to care, it's just so many people have given up. They don't even bother to go to the doctor because they know there's going to be a bill that they can't afford. And so to me that, what you're saying about, like that bargain in your head or whatever, like that to me is like the ultimate consequence of our shitty healthcare system is that we have this terrible relationship to our own health and our own bodies or whatever. Sorry, that was a rant.
I know. And even in the middle of your story, you kind of at one moment you said it was a bad decision to put off my care, but you didn't really have that much of a choice.
No.
So it was a bad decision on your part. This is just the position that we get put into. And as we're starting to see, it looks like more and more of America is being put into that same position that you are, which is just like, there's no way to make ends meet. You cannot do medical care and then all the other basics of living, essentially. Whether that's taking care of a family or what. Well, I do know the way to stop everyone from crying, though. The
crying podcast.
Let's talk more about a poll and data. So let's do a little brief data interlude, and we can, wash ourselves of any emotions and then we'll
Yes.
come back to it.
That's
God
great.
knows.
I like that Rebecca and I need a man to teach us how to shut off our emotions for a
no,
minute.
no. Me too. No matter how many I've listened to your story many times, Rebecca, and I have a hard time holding it together. We show a video of your story when we're teaching people how to teach their story, and every fucking time we watch your testimony
We
video,
fucking bawl like babies.
it's really hard just to continue the story. So,
Well, see, now you have this.
I know. I really fucked it up. But it's a really powerful story, and I think I know you've impacted a lot of other people to get involved. So thank you for telling the story, even though it must be wrenching to have to do it over and over again. So, Jillian, let's.
Yes.
We started with this big poll. This is like things have gotten much more terrible in America in terms of being able to access care with all these cost barriers. We're going to start with a couple different questions. One is obviously not all communities are impacted the same way by this rising inability to afford care. So we want to break down a little bit what's in the poll. Can you give us some of the highlights of who is most impacted, who's least impacted, all that stuff?
I don't know that I would call them highlights, but yes, I will tell you some of the things. Some of the terrible, terrible things.
I feel like it's going to be a highlight for white men, upper income somehow. I'm just going out on a limb.
Just guessing. Well, so this is so wild. So it turns out that, like you said, Americans are increasingly avoiding healthcare, which is delaying healthcare, which is so fucked up. And this is impacted by a couple of different factors, right? So the first one that's kind of obvious, I think, is income, right? The more money you have coming in, the less you feel like you have to delay your healthcare. But there were some kind of troubling things in there too. So basically, in 2022, Americans with an annual household income of under $40,000, which I just want to remind people is very, very, very low, were nearly twice as likely as those with an income of $100,000 or more to say that someone in their family delayed medical care for a serious condition, right? So that's like 18% of people who are making 100,000 or more, right, are still saying that they have to delay care, which is kind of wild to me. It's $100,000 does not go as far as it used to.
So that's for sure.
Yeah. And basically, this is up. This is up from the last time they polled. It's like up 12 points among lower income U.S. adults, and 11 points along middle income groups. So I know in America people don't care about anything until middle class people are affected. So here you go, America.
We've hit the threshold. So
so there's an income thing. But then the other thing that I wanted to bring up that was just really kind of fascinating is that there are some major gender and age differences here. And there's some stuff in the data that's tells some interesting stories there. So, basically like 32%, when they asked, 32% of women reported that they had put off medical treatment, and 20% of men reported that they were putting off medical treatment. So that's a 12-point gap. And it's well above the previous averages since 2001. So it looks like women are actually putting off care more often than men. And I know, Rebecca, you said you had a theory about why that was.
Yeah, I said that women are often caregivers. I know when I was a single mom, it was difficult to get health care because I had a kid and I couldn't really take her with me to like the gynecologist or anything. But I have a story of when I had a kidney infection. I have lupus, and so I had a kidney infection, and I was in the ER. And the nurse in the ER said I needed to come and I needed to find somebody to sit with my daughter because if they had to take me for imaging, there would be no one. And if I didn't, they were going to call social services. So that kind of spurred me to put off more healthcare later on, knowing that that
Oh
was
my
a
God.
possible outcome.
So just like the kind of, yeah, the way that women, hold the emotional, the emotional load for their family, and the scheduling, and the, getting the kids places and all that stuff. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it also has to do with that psychology of motherhood, though, that we were talking about before. And, the way that you were willing to make sacrifices for Charlie, your daughter, right? I mean, it's very much in parallel with the way in general when women spend money for the household, that they tend to make sacrifices for their family as well. Yeah.
And this is a good antidote, because when you just look at insurance coverage, more women have insurance than men do. So some people think that translates into better access to care, but it actually doesn't. So,
Oh,
and
that's a good point.
yeah, and the other side of it, of course, is women are paid less for the same work and have less access to good paying jobs. So even if you do have the same insurance as a man, for example, with co-payments and deductibles, because of that lower pay rate, women are going to be less able to afford the cost sharing up front. So
Also, we get gaslit as fuck when we go to the doctor. I don't know any woman who likes going to the doctor, or I mean, like, honestly, I've gone through periods of my life where I just stopped going to the doctor because I thought, this is not a system that is meant to acknowledge my trauma. Anyway, so yeah.
Sexism among providers, right?
I'm just saying that's also a thing.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the gender piece of it, and then there's also this age piece of it that is, I think, really disturbing, which is that a new high of 35% of adults aged 18 to 49 said that they or someone in their family put off care. And that is compared to like 25% of people who are 50 to 64. And then 13% of people who are 65 or older. Yeah. Obviously, the big difference here is Medicare, right? When you turn 65, you get access to universal health care, and then you, and then you put off care less, which is great. But I know even like my father-in-law, who was not really in a lower income bracket, but I know he put off care for at least 5 years between the age of 60 and 65 because he was just waiting for Medicare to happen.
Right.
Wait for that to kick
in. I hear that from so many people who are like, counting down the days to 65. And even so then, the gaps in Medicare are too big. They shouldn't be as big as they are now. I mean, it's like we look at these numbers and we're like, oh, only 13% of people 65 and older are putting off care. That's actually really bad. Also, our numbers are quite bad here, but nothing compared to 35% of younger adults. So.
That's so messed up, I mean, 18 years old, you're really still a kid, thinking about whether or not you can afford your healthcare treatment or whatever.
Right. And it also has long-term implications. If you're 18 and putting off healthcare, then that sets you up for chronic illness and a shorter lifespan and those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially also the mental health crisis that's happening now with young people is even worse than it was for our generation. So a lot of that care, I'm sure, that people are putting off is mental health care.
I actually wonder, because the survey question asked about medical services. Did you put off medical treatment? I wonder if a lot of people didn't even count like dental care here. So many people put off dental care. I think it's even worse than most of the others. But I bet you a lot of people didn't even think dental care when they heard like medical treatment. So it's probably worse than it says here. And I was struck by what Gallup did not bother breaking out the results by. They didn't say insured versus uninsured. I mean, we're talking about, people with cost sharing, like, co-payments and deductibles being a barrier to care. But if you're uninsured, everything is cost sharing. You have to pay the whole cost of care unless you can find some sort of a safety net program, which can be hard to come by. And it also didn't break it up by race and ethnicity. So why would Gallup care about such a thing?
But, we know. we know that things are bad and worse, and yeah. Yeah, that's a rough one. That's a rough one. So this Gallup poll is pretty fucking depressing. But as you pointed out, one of the weirder things about it, right, is just that all this stuff is getting so much worse, even more worser than it was during the pandemic. So like the real question is, why are we seeing this crazy double-digit increase in folks putting off medical care right now at this moment?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with virtual medicine that was very popular during the pandemic, and it made it more accessible to people that may have faced barriers to getting out and seeing a doctor, whether it was transportation or childcare or whatever. And with that kind of falling away and us going back to more in-person visits, I think it makes it harder for people.
Yeah, and I had kind of thought maybe it would go the other way, that it would be a lot of people putting off in-person visits because of the pandemic and then catching up on them after they, vaccines were a little bit more widespread. I thought we'd see more accessing of care, but clearly that didn't happen. And some of it, obviously, I think the one thing that really sets this last year apart is inflation, right? So our income is worth less. People are just being squeezed by like crazy food prices, crazy housing prices, like rent has been going through the roof. And I think that must be a part of the picture about why 2021 was even more worser than before, which is going to be the new title of the podcast, by the way, 2021, even more worse. Yeah, I mean, inflation has it's been kicking our ass. I mean, Well,
also, we have that child tax credit falling away too.
Yeah, that's right.
That
all the subsidies.
gave people a lot of extra money in their pocket.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, do you want to explain that for folks who might not know about it?
Oh, wow.
Oh, sorry. Not to put you on the spot.
If you don't know the facts, just make them up.
Yeah, just make them up. That's fine. Totally fine.
So during the pandemic, for a fixed amount of time, the government gave households, I'm not even sure what the total sum was because I only had one kid, but it was up to $200 a kid per month. I think, I don't quote me on it because I'm probably wrong, but it was some sort of money, and it gave households extra money in their pocket for the month, and it lowered child poverty by quite a big number, and we saw that go away as we started to pretend that the pandemic is not happening.
Right.
So
we were one Joe Manchin away from making that permanent too. So
yeah. So West Virginia, go get your guy.
Yeah.
It's like crazy.
We can't afford. I'm gonna start crying again if we have to talk about Build Back Better.
Oh, Manchin.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Oh my God! Did you see that thing that video of them high-fiving? It was Manchin and Cinema, and they were like high-fiving over how awesome they felt about making people die.
Yeah, it's high-fiveable worthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
They must be really proud of
guys.
themselves.
Way to go.
God.
So I've been canoeing outside of his houseboat on the Potomac. So if anyone wants to know how to do that, we could set that up.
I want to do that. Yes. Thank you. Oh, man.
So I guess, we could be in for another pretty rough year this year. I guess the question we should wrap with, of course, this is not at all a trick question, I promise you. What is the solution? What is the solution to this dire situation of over a third of the country can't access the care they need?
Sinking Manchin's houseboat. Yeah. Sorry.
Careful now.
Sorry, I didn't say that, and also it was a joke.
And if it happens,
NSA, if you are listening.
Obviously, it's Medicare for all. Actually, something very interesting, because I've been touring law schools, I've been talking to professors, and one of them said he can see no other way out of this healthcare mess other than Medicare for all.
If a lawyer can agree to it, then we know we're winning. right?
Well, the law school professor, because they love to argue because
Mhm.
just for the sake of arguing, and
Mhm.
yeah,
But you can't argue about that.
Mhm.
no,
You know,
apparently not.
yeah,
Oh,
obviously, I think the other thing we haven't talked that much about, but cost sharing has been rising so much in the last
yeah.
decade over decade. It just gets kind of worse and worse. I think
Regular listeners, by the way, will know that cost sharing is the health care industry jargon for fucking over.
it's true. It is a very Orwellian term when you think about it. It's like
Mm-mm.
we're not preventing you from getting care you need. We're just sharing in the costs. It's like it's almost like they're doing us a favor. Here, we're sharing these costs.
Yeah, Rebecca,
Uh,
you can share the cost of your care with yourself.
And this actually it got dramatically worse after the Affordable Care Act was implemented. It's not the fault of the Affordable Care Act, but it's how insurance companies responded to the Affordable Care Act. They're like, okay, we have to compete with each other. We're going to try and get our premiums down. So we're going to have more and more deductibles, more and more copayments, more and more things you have to pay for when you're trying to access the care. And also limited networks on top of that, which we've talked a little bit about previous episodes. So I think that combined with like inflation and like really shitty economic situation for a lot of households is like the perfect crisis that we're seeing right now. Where just like so many people have to put off care. So
I would like to see a little more cost sharing in healthcare. And I'll tell you about who I'd like to share that cost with.
yeah.
Why the fuck can't we just tax
Motion
rich
Mansion
people?
or
I want to share the cost of my healthcare with Elon Musk. And I'd like to pay him to pay most of it because, god damn it, why can we not just tax these fucking rich people and, get ourselves the healthcare we deserve?
he could probably cover like the entire uninsured population in America, couldn't he?
Exactly. Come on, Elon, step up.
All right. So obviously, I don't know how, like Rebecca was saying, I don't know how you solve this crisis within our current healthcare system. I mean, what are we going to do if you can't control costs overall? They're just going to get shifted onto people in different ways, either higher premiums or higher cost barriers. Maybe we should call them cost barriers instead of cost sharing. I think this is, and I mean, the pandemic also was like, how do you get through a pandemic without Medicare for all? You really can't. And there's a whole reckoning. But as we've talked about a little bit, I think the reason we didn't see like a huge surge of support in Medicare for all during the pandemic is because legislators didn't also have to listen to their constituents anymore because they weren't in their offices. They weren't having face-to-face meetings with people. So I think there's a reckoning coming, both like leftover from the pandemic and then also now this, like things just getting way, way worse because of inflation. So
yeah. Now that people like Rebecca are able to leave the house and go invade offices on the Hill, they need to worry again.
Oh yeah, Capitol Hill is now open again. If you want to go visit your congressperson, you can do so now.
Oh, I can't wait. This has not happened with the Massachusetts legislature. The state legislature is still hiding here. House reps basically don't go in anymore. And like we just did a round of lobbying for the Medicare for All bill in Massachusetts, and you literally can't get a hold of your own reps unless they want you to. Like you can't go in and find them anywhere. They don't answer their phone. A lot of the voicemail systems are just filled up. They don't respond to emails. It's just like there's no account. The whole accountability structure has kind of disappeared, and it's harder to organize than it was pre-pandemic. But I hope that we're getting back to it, just like we are in Congress. So now is a good time to be a little unruly and a little troublemaking. So
good trouble.
Exactly. Yes. And if you want to get involved, definitely go to our website, healthcare-now.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can reach out to us at info@healthcarenow.org, and we'll help you to organize your legislator. And I want to thank, of course, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us on this program.
Yay.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I was so excited to be back with you guys.
We
Thanks
missed
for
you so
making me
much.
cry in live time this time instead
Yeah,
of
yeah.
watching a recording. And I also want to thank our podcast team who makes this whole program possible. Our podcast manager, Angelique Davis. Our researcher for this episode was our new intern, Pim Rajnaporn. Thank you, Pim. Great
Love
job
you,
in your
Pim.
first episode. Our show notes writer was Jerry Katz, and our audio editor was Christian Brandt. So don't forget to like the episode, subscribe to the Medicare for All podcast on your favorite platform. And this show is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. If you want to support our work, you can donate at our website, healthcare-now.org. Thanks so much, y'all.
Stay safe. Stay dangerous.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.